Hi, everyone. I'm here with Rachel Grant, and Rachel is a disruptor of traditional modes of healing, creator of the Beyond Surviving program, international speaker, podcast host, and sexual abuse recovery coach with an MA in counseling psychology. She is also the author of Beyond Surviving, the final stage in recovery from sexual abuse. Based on her educational training, study of neuroscience, and lessons learned from her own journey, she has successfully used the Beyond Surviving program since 2007 to help survivors of childhood sexual abuse who are beyond sick and tired of feeling broken and unfixable break free from the pain of abuse and finally move on with their lives. Welcome, Rachel. I'm so grateful to have you here.
Yes, Miss Laura, I am glad to be here with you too. Excited for our conversation, and hello to everybody who's watching and listening. Glad you've joined us.
Yeah, let's jump right in. So, I wanted to ask you, what brought you to do the work that you do in the world?
Mm, Thanks, Laura. Yeah, like often life is unexpected. This really wasn't the grand plan, but life happens, and really born out of my own experience with childhood sexual trauma. I was abused by my grandfather. Starting around the age of 10, maybe a little bit earlier, but my most, conscious memories are at 10 and going on for some time. And, the abuse, he was living in our home. And so as soon as that abuse happened, it really had an impact on so many things. Certainly my sense of self and my sense of safety, my understanding of the world around me. And so as the abuse continued and escalated, I found myself just feeling more and more consumed by, fears and negative thoughts and shame and guilt. I didn't know that's what all that was back then, of course, just knowing
Mhm.
that all of a sudden life didn't feel the same that it had prior to that beginning. And one day my mom just happened to see him abusing me. And so she snatched me away from him, and my mom and dad got him out of the house right away, which I always make a point to say because I know I've been doing this work for 17 years and I've heard too many stories of people not being believed or supported in that way. And it did make a big difference for sure for me that he was no longer in our home. I had a few run-ins with him, after the fact, just at like family reunions and things. But for the most part, I was, protected. But even though he was out of the home, my parents didn't really quite know what the next step was. They tried to get me into counseling, which I literally would run away and hide in the woods because I don't want to talk about this. Are you kidding me? Right? I just want to
Mhm.
pretend that everything is okay, go back to being a kid. And of course, that doesn't really work. And so I spent, my teen years and my early 20s, really wrestling ultimately with the impacts of this abuse and it, of course, it going unaddressed. But my vision for my life was really to be a high school English teacher. That's what I really wanted to
Mhm.
do. And so that's what I was pursuing. And I did my degree in English and I did work as a teacher for some time. And then when I moved to California in 2004, it was kind of a moment of reevaluation and what am I doing that I enjoy and that I don't enjoy. So I actually decided to be a nanny. And I worked with that family for 8, 9 years. So really, like those are my surrogate babies, if you
Mhm.
will. But as they were growing up, and I was doing more healing work for myself, and then I went through a divorce, and that was really the moment where life turned for me, Laura, because I just everything had been stripped away. What I thought my future was going to be, what I thought was going to happen for my life changed. And I remember sitting in this new apartment with literally all I had was a sleeping bag and a lamp at that moment. And I had this super strong thought of, man, like I have really got to get my shit together, like right now, or I
Mhm.
am going to spend the rest of my life kind of repeating these patterns. That 10-year relationship was abusive, painful. And so that lit a fire in me. And that's really when my attention started turning much more intentionally to healing from abuse. What do I actually need to do in order to heal? Because I'd done therapy and I had a lot of what I call book smarts about trauma. I knew all the lingo and I kind of had an understanding of some of the connections and the reasons why I struggled in the way that I did, but I wasn't getting any really good guidance on what do I need to do to actually shift and change. And so that's what really propelled me and set me on a mission. And so I did my master's in counseling psychology, studied neuroscience, and just started using myself as a guinea pig, like what will actually work. But my background in education came in handy because then I started formalizing everything I was seeing and experiencing and what was working into curriculum,
Mhm.
into a step-by-step process. And then that is how, Beyond Surviving was born. I really got to the place of like, I don't want to just live my life. I don't want to just, survive it. I want to live it. And then that's the heart of Beyond Surviving and the work I do now with people all over the country, all over the world.
Wow, that's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. And a lot of what you said, we have some things in common because, well,
Mm,
first of all, I want to say thank you for validating the experience of abuse survivors who are not believed, because that
yeah.
is, a lot of viewers here, and I know a lot of people that you've encountered as well in your practice. And for sharing your own experience, because I think it really helps people feel less alone when they know the person they go to for support has been where they have and really understands. And then I'm resonating with, I took English at my undergrad as well as psychology, and I
Oh,
used to be a writer. And I also had a 10-year marriage that ended in divorce, and that was the start of
oh,
my healing journey as well. So we really have some things in common.
that's
And
wild.
yeah, that was the really the point too, where I said, I have to do something. And I think it was just getting out of the marriage was, it just got rid of all the distractions or maybe the enabling that was going on, and allowed me to really look at myself and what I really wanted my life to look like going forward. So I hear
Beautiful.
you on that. So today we're kind of focusing on our fear of abandonment. And I wanted to ask you, since we're here at a parent wound conference,
Mhm.
how does having an abusive parent, or in your case, a grandparent or a caregiver, how
Mhm.
does that create a fear of abandonment in us?
Yeah. So as I was wrestling with this in my own healing, I heard a lot about this idea of abandonment and the concept, but I couldn't quite get through the minutia of it. The word itself felt layered and confusing and what's really going on here. And so as I began to kind of research and study and dig into this idea and concept, what ultimately came forward for me was looking at this as different types of abandonment. And the very first one type of abandonment is the loss of protection. And that is the absolute experience that we have in the context of trauma and abuse. There is somebody who is supposed to protect us, nurture us, take care of us, love us, and they did not. And then sometimes we can have secondary wounding, right? If a parent does know and then they don't protect us from the person who's abusing us, right? And so when we're in that context of, depending on someone else, we're children, right? We need them for our safety, for our survival. And then they fail to take care of us or protect us, then that creates a violation and a wounding, and then it creates this fear around relationship. And is that going to occur again and again and again? Am I going to count on people or trust people, and then they're going to violate or harm me? And so that's really where that first rift begins in the context of abuse, when we lose the protection of somebody who was supposed to provide that.
That makes a lot of sense. And I even resonate with what you say about how it affects our relationship, because I'm engaged now, but I spent many years being single. And part of the reason for that was that I deeply desired that intimacy and that connection, but I was also afraid of it. So I know there were ways that I was unconsciously pushing it away.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you, how does this fear of abandonment affect our relationships?
Right. So most of the time, what people end up doing is if they're in that level of I'm looking for the protection, okay, so then what starts to happen is you actually lose connection with your adult self. So the idea is that we start to be dependent upon this partner. I'm looking for you to solve the problem of this wounding. And the only way that that can happen is if I feel protected and safe. But that ultimately isn't truly the role of an intimate partner. So, that gets everything's kind of flip-flopped because you're remaining a little bit in your child's self and then looking to the partner to provide, protection, and so you can't actually be in the relationship from an adult empowered place. And that's why we get these like wonky relationship dynamics, right? Maybe one of us is very parenting towards the other, or we're holding the person responsible to commit to doing certain things. Often it leads to a lot of testing, right? Like that was definitely my MO, right? Like I'm going to test people. But that actually comes under the second type of abandonment, which is loss of connection, which we can talk about more in a moment. But the framework that we have to onboard in order to get out of that patterning when we're looking for protection and safety from a partner is to connect into the idea that I am an adult now and I have choice. So I'm not actually dependent upon anyone else for safety and protection. For example, right? Like if I'm walking down the street with my like a friend or a partner who's, 6'2", feel a little safer, a little more protected, right? But I'm not dependent upon my partner or my friend. I can walk down the street by myself. Yeah. Safety really is often an interior job, but that's probably a topic for another day.
Mhm.
So we want to be able to hold that distinction like, no, in this partnership, in this relationship, I'm an adult, they're an adult, where I'm not dependent upon them for my safety or protection. And then that allows us to shift the dynamic to adult adult versus child adult. And then we get to focus on that second type of abandonment, which really is what's going on in our adult relationships, which is the fear of losing connection. Does that make sense? Did I leave anything there that brought up any questions or not quite
It
coming through?
really, it really does make a lot of sense. And I like what you said about safety being an inside job.
Mm,
We get into codependency when we're kind of looking to our partner to fulfill these needs that I guess our parents didn't fulfill. Is that why we're looking to them for
hmm
that? And
hmm
how can we begin to, I guess, give ourselves what our parents weren't able to give us for whatever reason?
Yeah, absolutely. So it is a way of looking at where am I, like I'm not dependent upon. So holding that mindset, that allows you then to move through the world from that adult empowered place. And so then you make kind of different choices. And in your relationship dynamics, you can look at here's a need that I have that's not being fulfilled versus I'm looking to you to provide a container where I always feel safe or where I always feel protected. And that's like a bottomless well, right? So a partner's never going to be able to meet that. And then instead, we turn our attention to what's happening in our connection. And am I testing the connection or am I fostering the connection? A lot of people in their relationships, because of that fear of losing connection, which is also at play in that first wound, right? Like my grandfather was a friend, he was a companion, he was somebody I enjoyed like hanging out with and playing with. And then once the abuse started, that totally put a rift in that connection. And so that was like the second level of understanding for me that in my relationships, I had this fear that people were always going to like trick me or fool me, or then later in relationships, like leave me. And so trying to mitigate all of those fears led me into a lot of control behaviors, right? Trying to manage, right, all of the future outcomes and what was going to happen here. Hmm.
Yeah, and it sounds like, well, I would love to hear a little bit more of the testing because this is the first time I've heard it described that way, and it is very accurate. So because
Yeah.
sometimes people, including myself in the past, do these things unconsciously in relationships. And so what would testing look like so somebody who maybe doesn't even know they're doing it can
Mhm.
recognize it?
Well, I'll share my favorite way of testing, and then I can share with you just other examples that I've seen along the way. So my MO was it was like pushing. How hard can I push? Are you going to leave if I do this? Are you going to leave if I do this? What if I do this? What if I'm really difficult in this way? What if I challenge you in this way? What if I throw a temper tantrum? Like even like going into these like almost like being the child, right?
Mm.
Are you going to nurture me? Are you going to love me? Are you going to still accept me? Or are you going to reject me, leave me? And so it would be like kind of these escalating behaviors of like, what if I do this? What if I do that? What if I do this?
Mhm.
Testing can also be absolutely this a way that I'm almost like setting people up. Like I'm gonna set you up to fail almost. Like I'm gonna set a boundary or I'm gonna make a request that nobody could really follow through on all the time. And then as soon as there's like any gap in follow through, any inconsistency, it's a quick like, see, I knew it kind of a thing. And we jump on
Mhm.
that. And I can't trust you. I can't count on you. You are, out to get me or whatever. Even, people sometimes just get into the withdrawal mode is another. If I leave, if I pull away, I would do that one too, right? Do you come after me? Do you seek me out? Do you follow up or not? Or do you leave me in that state where I've almost exactly that place of like, I feel disconnected, I feel abandoned, I feel lost over here, and aren't you going to come and like make sure I'm all right, kind of a thing rather than just being honest about where I'm at and having open, healthy communication about what's going on. Those are some first thoughts come to mind. Do any come to mind for you? Any others that you would
You
add?
know what? As you're speaking, I am resonating with this stuff, and I could recognize myself doing those things in the past. And so I had to, when I got into this current relationship, I so didn't want to sabotage it that I actually had to say to him, because he's securely attached, he had a nice family and all of that stuff.
Mm,
I had to say to him, if I start pushing you away, don't let me. And
yeah.
I did start to do it. But it's interesting how you can trick yourself. You can fool yourself into thinking this all makes a lot of sense when really you're just doing distancing behaviors, I call them. Trying to create distance is what I was doing anyway. And tell
Hmm.
yourself that, no, this makes a lot of sense. And then because I had kind of warned him of my background and what I might do, he was able to say, hey, is this what you were talking about? Are you
Right.
doing that right now? And I could say, oh, yeah, maybe I am, and I think that self-awareness and sharing that with another person, if they're open to hearing it, can help.
Yeah, cheers to that, Laura. I 100% agree. Naming what some of that old patterning is in, how we've shown up in relationships in past, what are some of those core, narratives. And of course, we can do internal work and shift those narratives quite a lot, shift behaviors, but ultimately relationship is a little bit of like, I think of it a bit as a playground where drawing off of like what Harville Hendrix says in Getting the Love That You Want, we're often partnering with people who give us the opportunity, right, to process through things and to heal some of those wounds. So we often will find people who push that button, right? Push that
Yeah.
edge. And so it's like a responsibility of our own to be aware and to know that and to be able to name it and articulate it. And then hopefully, exactly as you found, a partner who can hold space for that and kind of ride through that. Because then on the other side of it, I'm only guessing based on what you've said, right? You end up in
Mhm.
that secure attachment, right? That helps to heal that, whether it was anxious attachment or avoidant attachment, right? If you're pulling away, then that helps you both to build more of that secure attachment together.
Yeah, you're so right. And, thinking of this fear of abandonment, we've talked about how it shows up in relationships, especially romantic ones. Are there any other areas of life where this will show up and maybe sabotage us or create problems in our adult life if we haven't dealt with it?
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's for me one of when I began to reframe the idea of abandonment as the fear of losing connection and understanding like that can be the dynamic that's happening. Well, then that can happen in friendships, that can happen in
Mhm.
family, that can even happen in the context of work. Yeah, and so that same
Yes.
energy can come in when we become like attached to something, and then the fear of losing it is what starts to drive our behavior, and we're not adapting or mitigating the fear using a variety of things that we can do, like staying present, managing the risk, evaluating the risk, and even, just being able to surrender. I love the word abandonment because it also tells us a bit about the solution. Part of the definition of abandon is to surrender. And I think that
Mhm.
for me, in relationships, the more I can stay in the energy of I'm here right now, and that's what I have. That's all I can really count on, because who knows what might happen in the next minute, hour, or day. Yeah. And so, what I need to attune to is that I need to show up here in this moment, see what happens, like be curious, just enjoy the ride, right? Be in it,
Mhm.
be on the journey with this person. And if you need to get off, right? But then
Mhm.
that, it helped me get out of the patterning of spending so much of my time thinking about losing the person that I wasn't actually being with the person. I was off in
Mhm.
some future world, right, where everything was going to be terrible and bad. And here they are sitting across from me at dinner, talking about tacos or whatever.
Yeah.
And I'm
Yes.
missing it. I'm missing it because, I'm so far off into my fear about what's going to happen. And so the more I practiced and cultivated, presence, and it's not a permanent state, it comes and goes, but, just reminding myself often, like, Rachel, right here, right now, this is what we've got. That
Mhm.
really settled me. There's a great saying, Laura, what is always arriving but never comes? Tomorrow.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and you're so right. I do find that the simple key to joy, peace, happiness really is being here and now in this very
Yeah.
moment, each moment as it comes. But it can be the hardest thing to do,
Oh,
really.
girl. Yeah. Because what that requires is that we deal with our fear of the unknown. Like, we as people, we like to have, understand, predictability. We as humans do this all the time. Craft predictability. Here's my schedule. Here's my day. Here's what I'm doing. Here's what we're doing 2 months from now, right? And
Mhm.
it's still important psychologically to plan and do some of that. But ultimately, life is unpredictable. And so embracing the fear of the unknown is part of what helps us step into presence. If we had a crystal ball and we just knew how things would go, well, then that would be so much easier, right? Maybe, but we don't. And so being able to just sit in the unknown, which means all I really have clarity about is that right now I'm sitting here talking with Laura. That's all I know, right? That's it.
Mhm. Beautiful. That is so beautiful and so simple. I love it. It's very achievable, you know?
Yeah.
Um, I'm sitting here talking to you, and what strikes me is you have a very joyful affect. So you come across as a very positive person. You seem very happy. And I'm curious to know, is this something you had to work toward, or was that kind of an innate part of your personality? And I ask that because I come
Right.
across a lot of people, clients or others who have gone through this
Mm.
stuff who have a lot of trouble accessing joy. So, do you have any secrets to share, or
Oh,
how do you
wow.
get that?
Oh, gosh, what a cool question. I don't think I've ever been asked that question before. All
Mhm.
right. Well, so I think that it's, nurture nature, but I'm a human being and I have my days. And even right now, as I'm feeling a lot of joy and connection because I love this conversation and I love teaching. And so it helps me feel into that. And I'm also going through, grief. There are things in my life right now that are very sad that I'm dealing with. So for me, I think ultimately it's not always been this, but at this stage in my life, I think the thing that most supports me and what you just were speaking of is an attitude and a framework that I'm working more and more on every day, which is to just embrace everything.
Mhm.
And I try more and more to release any judgments or attachments to this is good and this is bad. Like, it's all just a
Mhm.
part of my human experience. Like, if after this call 2 hours later, I'm feeling sad and I get into bed and cry for a little, okay, that's what I'm doing. It doesn't mean, oh
Mhm.
no, I've lost my joy, right? Or,
Yeah.
oh gosh, everything's falling apart. Because then 3 hours later, I could be watching the Olympics and laughing and like cheering and having a great time. You see what I
Mhm.
mean? So I think I did grow up with people who were great storytellers, who loved to laugh. In fact, my mom when I left and finally got out of that marriage, and we were having a conversation one day, she says to me, Rachel, I'm so glad you're laughing again. And that really stayed with me, Laura, because it did teach me something that when I'm in environments or circumstances or situations where I do lose that capacity for my humor, for my laughter, that's now become like, oof, that's a red flag. I better really assess what's going on here if I'm losing that sense of laughter. So I don't know if I answered your question, but those are the things that
You
came to mind.
did. You did. And I think it's very validating too, because you said that you don't always have to be up and happy and joyful to be generally a joyful person. Just because you have a down day, or like you said, you might go to bed and have a cry, it doesn't mean your joy has been stolen. And so
100%.
that is really important to know too. I really love that. Thank you for sharing that, Rachel. And
Yeah.
we're coming to the end of our time together,
Okay.
but I know that you have a free offer that I'm going to link to below this interview. So if you want to take a minute or two and share anything you like about that.
Okay, thank you. Yes, everyone, I would like to share my 3 stages of recovery from childhood abuse checklist. While in my work, I primarily focus on sexual trauma. It's true that over these years, I've worked with a variety of different types of experiences. So you can use this framework regardless of the experience. So even, yeah, parent wounding, loss, neglect, these kinds of things. But this framework is going to walk you through the 3 stages of healing, which I identify as victim, survivor, beyond surviving. And of course, you can be in more than one stage at once, but it's just a nice kind of gives you a sense of where you might be at. And in this checklist, you'll get a deeper understanding about what each of those stages are really about. And then what are the goals and intentions for each stage. And super importantly, like what are the best types of support to get based on where you're at? Because a lot of times people in healing get stalled out, stuck, or worse, re traumatized because the type of support they're utilizing is not in alignment with where they are in their healing. And so please check that out. And of course, if you have questions about it or comments or ahas, I'd love to hear it.
Thank you so much, Rachel, for making that available to our audience. And I'm so grateful to have spent this time with you. I learned a lot. I gained some great insights, and I know our audience did too. So thank you.
Aw, cheers to that. Thanks, Laura. I really appreciate you creating the space and the opportunity. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in and listening. Happy to be here as a resource and support however I can be.
Wonderful. Take care, Rachel.
You too.